afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. As always, on the fourth Wednesday of the month, I'm joined by Mark LaBarr, a conservation biologist for Audubon, Vermont. And today we talk about what this dry summer has meant for the birds. Great to see you.
Always great to be here.
So despite the recent rains, it's been pretty dry this summer. So what does that mean for birds this time of year?
It has been dry. Going around up on Lake Champlain doing my turn work, you really notice all the big rocks that are sticking up. And, we've had some rains recently that have come through, and that's been great. And when we get dry years like this, the thing that comes to my mind, and to a lot of birders' minds, is the opportunity to go and find shorebirds. The dry weather with the lake going down often opens up these big mud flats, which the migrating birds will take advantage of. And so there's been a number of shorebird sightings, good spots up and down the lake, Delta Park, down where Dead Creek comes into Otter Creek, and various other places that pop up. So a good shorebird year.
Mm-hmm. So what are we seeing?
Well, I'm not the best at shorebirds. I have had the opportunity to go to the Bahamas and do plovers and see, piping plovers down there and see some of the birds on their wintering ground. But shorebirds can be really tough, especially the group of what they call the peeps, which are the smaller shorebirds. And the ones that we see most common here is the least sandpiper. It gets its name because it is a small bird. And I like to think of the least sandpiper being a bird that one of the ways that I identify it is that it has yellow legs. And so in my brain I say yellow legs, least color. It's not very colorful. So that differentiates it from another bird that looks very similar to that bird, which is the semi-palmated sandpiper. And you can see this bird has darker legs. They're both about the same size. They have a little different in coloration on their back patterns, but that's one of the keys. And oftentimes, these are birds that they're feeding, they're moving around, they're, kind of tough to put a bead on.
So are there, do we see any larger shorebirds?
Yeah, it's just, some of the bigger ones that are being seen now that folks have seen are what are called the yellow legs. And there are two of them. One is called the lesser yellow legs, a little bit smaller, but you see gets their names from that bright, long yellow legs. This one, the bill is a little bit straighter than the other yellow legs that folks are seeing, which is the greater yellow legs. And they look almost exactly the same. And when they're side by side, you can differentiate them by size. And folks that are really good at shorebirds can pick them out. But that greater yellow legs also has a little sweep to its bill. So its bill kind of, you can see, goes up a little bit, and that's another way that you can identify these. And if you see a lot of them, here in Vermont we don't get a lot of shorebirds. People that live along the coast see these birds all the time, and so it becomes easier for them to identify.
So what else have folks been seeing?
Well, there's a lot of other shorebirds that are kind of mid-range shorebirds, I would say. It's smaller, or medium in stature. One that's been seen is the short-billed dowitcher. And this is a bird, it's not as big as yellow legs, doesn't have as large legs. It's bigger than the least and the semi-palmated. And it is oftentimes compared to a sewing machine. When it feeds, its bill goes up and down, kind of in a very straight sewing machine pattern. And so that's one of the birds. Another one is one of the plovers, which is the black-bellied plover. And you can see that this bird has remnants of its black belly. That black is much more extensive when it's breeding, but as these birds are now migrating from their breeding grounds far to the north, they're also beginning to molt into different, much more drab winter plumage. A good bird that folks have been seeing is the pectoral sandpiper. It gets its name because of that very distinct differentiation between the white underbelly and that really strong, sharp contrast along at the pectoral area of the bird. And so that's another good one. And then a bird, the solitary sandpiper. And this bird gets its name because oftentimes it's seen in either very small groups or oftentimes by itself. And the characteristic feature for this shorebird is that white eye ring. You can, and the kind of
Okay.
the flecking on the back. So that's, there are other shorebirds that pass through, and again, one of the challenges for a lot of birders is, you got your scope and you're looking at lengths of tail versus wing lengths and all sorts of stuff to try to pull them. It's always good. If I go shorebirding, it's always good to have somebody that's really good with you to point them out, and then you can go, oh yeah, I can see that.
I saw that.
See that. Yeah.
So are there any shorebirds that actually breed here?
Yeah, there are a couple, and these are, not necessarily shorebirds sometimes, but the one that we would probably see the most and our viewers would know the most is the killdeer. And of course, this is a bird that will, feed in these mud flats, and people are seeing them out and about. But they're also a bird that during the summer does breed here in Vermont. And this is that bird that, I often get calls, or we've had letters of they'd like to nest in kind of rocky, open, patchy areas, which oftentimes is people's driveways, or their walkways along the side of the house, or out in a pasture. You probably, do you have them around here? Yeah.
I get screamed at on a regular basis.
Yes. And so that, they're very difficult to see, the nests at least, and the parents will, scold you and run around and do the broken leg. But those two distinct black bands there are pretty characteristic. And then we also have things like spotted sandpipers, which breed here. I see them up on the islands. There used to be a bird, the upland sandpiper, which was a larger bird, which is on the endangered species list. We don't get many confirmed sightings anymore that it's actually breeding in the state. So there are a couple other shorebirds, or birds that use the shoreline, but also, upland sandpipers like hayfields, for instance.
So you mentioned plumage. Do these birds look the same in the breeding grounds as they do on the wintering grounds? So
most of these birds, like that black-bellied plover, go through some kind of transition, and one that folks spend a lot of time at the beach, especially in the fall and the winter. When we were down in the Bahamas, we saw quite a few of these. A good example is the sanderling. So this is what the sanderling looks like in the winter time. So it loses its plumage, and it just has that white-gray thing. And this is one of those classic birds that runs up as the water goes away along the beach and then runs back.
And we should say this is just a photograph, but he does have 2 feet.
He does have, yes. And in the wintertime, basically those sanderlings, or in the breeding period, they have a much darker and browner back, so they look quite a bit different than that. And that picture that we just saw, I think, is
a viewer letter. So we have time for that. So let's, okay, this is from Donna West from Morrisonville, New York. And she writes, recently we had a new visitor to our bird bath. I quickly took a few pictures of him before he left. I did a search on the web to see if I could identify him. It appears it is a male American redstart. I was wondering if you could verify that for me.
It is. And that's one of our warblers. So it is a warbler, even though it's called a redstart. That was the male, very black with those orange wings. The female looks quite a bit different than that. And the first-year males actually don't have that plumage either. They're much drabber. They don't get that black, and they'll have some yellowish to orangish color underwing coverts. But this is a nice male, and this is one that you would find in young forests, or younger forests.
It's a great photograph.
Yeah, it is, because they're tough to get pictures of because they're usually moving around. And this is, this bird's song is 246-810. That's at least how I remember it. So, and then we did get a couple more letters from folks. Here's one from Jerry Higgins of Norwich. And she says, I watch your Bird Night show always. Thank you, Jerry. Recently I saw a bird I didn't know. I have a bird book, but couldn't find it in it. And there's a little picture here with
she drew a picture, which I love.
With some very distinctive things, which helped us identify it. I got lucky on this one. And I think what she's looking at is a northern flicker.
Now, what did she point out in her letter?
That the red on the top of the head, okay, and that what we call the mustache, or that black that comes down from the bill. Yeah, and so those were two characteristics which she drew. She also said, it has shades of brown, and it's a little bit larger than a robin, and flickers will feed on the ground, and so it would be a bird that you would potentially associate with, say, a flock of robins that were out. Flickers also have a big white patch on their rumps, so if you do happen to walk out and you're seeing these birds fly away, that white rump is going to be distinctive of the flicker as well.
Great. And you have another letter that you want to read here?
I do. This is from Jamie, and she says, "This bird stopped by my feeder around the last week of April 2016. I grabbed my Sibley's book to identify it, but the only thing that comes close is the brown thrasher. Unfortunately, there was a screen in the window, so it's not as clear as I would like." So Jamie lives in St. Albans, and you can see this bird is here, and it's sitting, and this is a great shot because thrashers, even though they're kind of big, they can be very secretive. They're also very loud. So they're in with the catbirds and the mockingbirds. And this one obviously came in the spring and was taking advantage of the suet here. So they're
really distinctive eye.
Yeah, and thrashers are they're declining in the state. They're associated with a lot of the shrubland habitat that we've talked about, golden-winged warblers and some of those other birds. So we don't see as many as we used to as that habitat goes away. But that's a great shot even with the screen there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. All right, here's a question from Doug Coughlin of Newark, Vermont, and he writes, "My wife Donna and I watch your program when we can. We also own 100 acres in Newark, Vermont. Recently, we have observed a male eastern towhee on 2 different occasions. I've been told this is rare for our area. Thought you might be interested in this."
Yeah, so, we see, when I think of towhees, I think of the Champlain Valley, and I think of the Connecticut River Valley. They like the thrasher, like that young, scrubby habitat, old farm field habitat, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to show up in other places that have that same habitat type. This is a classic male with that rufous side. It's also been called the rufous-sided towhee, and its song is a classic. It goes towhee, that's its call, but its song is "Drink Your Tea." So it's a bird that if you're out in places like the Charlotte Wildlife Park or other areas that have that, you'll often hear that "drink your tea" call. And again, it's another bird that its numbers have been declining because of loss of that habitat. What's interesting about that bird is when I go down to Connecticut, I often see that bird actually in the forest. So it's using different habitats in different areas.
Interesting.
And I think, do we have one last one?
I think we do.
I've got so much.
Gloria?
Oh, yeah. So this is a picture that Gloria Gates sent to us. And this is an interesting one. This looks to me like a downy woodpecker, but you can see that really abnormal bill.
Yeah.
So this is a woodpecker. She said that it's been feeding at her suet feeder and comes in regularly. Somehow that bill grew longer. I've had pictures sent in to me on a number of occasions with this kind of deformity. Sometimes it's just a longer lower bill or a longer upper bill. And the bird looks healthy. It doesn't look like a juvenile, so it looks like it's lived at least 1 year. So the bill has not necessarily been a negative. It may be taking advantage of feeders and suet feeders
Right, it's
primarily.
lucky to have that.
To have that
easy
there.
source of food.
Exactly. So, so hopefully that's going to be a bird that sticks around and takes advantage of Gloria's feeders.
Now, talk about sticking around. This is really a time of year when birds are starting to kind of rotate through.
Yes.
So what will we be seeing, do you think, in the next few weeks to a month?
We're starting to head in. The shorebirds are migrating. They're some of the first ones that start to pass through and move through Vermont. And again, like I said, this year with low water, we're likely to see some of those. In the coming weeks, we'll start seeing a lot of our small songbirds, our warblers and things like that, vireos through the months of September. Those will be the ones that folks will be out looking for. Obviously, they can be challenging this time of year. They lose a lot of those bright plumages and they're not singing, but that's always an exciting time. And then, as the season moves along, we start moving into the hawk migration. People will be going come mid-September through October. They'll be heading up to the, Mount Philo and different places in Vermont to watch the hawks. Sparrows sparrows come in a little bit later, and of course then the waterfowl, come through as well. Usually the beginning of October we get the largest numbers of, say, snow geese and stuff like that down at Dead Creek when they show up. So really a big change over time, and a challenging time for the birds too, because as much as we think of protecting their breeding grounds and their wintering grounds, they have to get between those two places.
Right.
And so having habitat available to them at these what they call stopover sites is key and crucial to a lot of species. Especially a lot of the young birds, which it's their first time at it.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Mark. If you have a bird-related question, you can contact Mark. Write to him at Audubon, Vermont, 255 Sherman Hollow Road in Huntington. The zip code is 05462. You can also email your question to Mark. His address is mlabarr@audubon.org. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Always great to be here.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.